Hello everyone, Charlie in Westeros here, and as promised, I'm finally bringing you part 1 in my 2-part video series on Rhaegar Targaryen. In this one, I will be covering the Targaryen prince's early life up until the events at the tourney of Harrenhal. This series will act as a follow-up to my Summerhall series, and as a prequel to my Tower of Joy series, so be sure to check those out if you haven't already. I will be focusing specifically on the birth, youth, and early adult life of Rhaegar Targaryen, and the kind of theories that typically come up in reference to this character. Part 2 of the series, meanwhile, will focus on the tourney of Harrenhal itself, so stay tuned for that later on. Also, if you want the sources I used when discussing some of the theories relating to Rhaegar, they are linked in the info box below, and I strongly encourage you to check them out as the creators of those theories have some even more developed thoughts on the matter than I do. As always, I'll start off by sharing some facts behind Rhaegar's early life before addressing some theories surrounding him, and finally give my own thoughts on the matter. So without further ado, here is the video. Now of course, when discussing Rhaegar's birth, the tragedy at Summerhall does come into play. He was born on the same day and location as the tragedy took place in 259 AC. Given the calamity surrounding his birth, I think it is important to comment on Rhaegar's personality. He is said to have read obsessively, to the point that jests were made about his habits. He became a noted warrior later in life, though it seems like this wasn't his initial inclination. In fact, Rhaegar came to possess a melancholic fondness for the ruins of Summerhall. In A Storm of Swords, it was revealed by an undercover Barristan Selmy that from reading something unknown in his scrolls, Rhaegar motivated himself to become a warrior. Despite performing well at tournaments, men often said Rhaegar loved his harp more than he loved his lance. It is noteworthy to mention that his songs were said to bring women to tears, most especially following his visits to the ruins of Summerhall, where he would bring his harp. Rhaegar was, in some sense, a bit of a conundrum. Despite having a number of brave and powerful close friends, including the likes of Jon Connington, his ex-squires Miles Mooton and Richard Lonmouth, and especially Arthur Dayne, whom he was closest to, Rhaegar was often gloomy, private, and bookish. And yet, during the tournament in honor of his younger brother Viserys' birth in Lannisport, the small folk apparently cheered for Prince Rhaegar above all other contenders, including Tywin and King Aerys. As the heir to the throne, Rhaegar was a popular marriage candidate in the Seven Kingdoms. Given the lack of appropriate Valyrian-blooded candidates in Westeros and an apparent lack of appropriate females of noble enough birth for Rhaegar and Essos, the Targaryen prince was married to the Dornish princess Elia Martell in a lavish ceremony. With time, and largely due to his father's increasing descent into paranoia and madness, Rhaegar and Aerys grew progressively estranged. As a result, Rhaegar chose to reside with his wife at Dragonstone instead of King's Landing. Their marriage would produce 2 children, an older daughter named Rhaenys, and a baby son who they named Aegon. During this time, Rhaegar would often correspond with Maester Aemon via raven messages, informing the latter of his belief that his child, Prince Aegon, was the prince that was promised. Despite this, and if we assume the vision Daenerys had in the House of the Undying can be deemed to be true, Rhaegar seems to have believed that he required a total of 3 children, seemingly stating during the birth of his second child, Aegon, that, quote, "There must be one more. The dragon has 3 heads," before he picked up his silver harp and began to play. That vision, however, brings up one major issue. Elia was delicate, and following the birth of her son was declared to be unable to have any more children after the 2 she bore. Naturally, this leads us to events at the tourney of Harrenhal, as well as Rhaegar's escapade with Lyanna Stark, but these are issues that will be addressed in part 2 of the series. For now, there is one final issue that merits some attention, and that is the growing tension between Rhaegar and his father, creating 2 distinct factions, one loyal to King Aerys, and the second loyal to Prince Rhaegar. It would seem this divide was severe enough to force Grand Maester Pycelle to dispatch a letter to the Citadel, writing that the division at court strongly resembled those before the Dance of the Dragons, and that a civil war would break out unless some accord could be reached that would satisfy both parties. With the issues of Rhaegar's melancholic youth, his interesting beliefs and habits including his visits to the ruins of Summerhall, as well as the apparent tension between the father and son mentioned, I think this is a good point to address some of the theories surrounding Rhaegar Targaryen prior to his actions at the tourney of Harrenhal. Perhaps the most important theory surrounding Rhaegar is his birth. Was it a coincidence such an enigmatic figure was born during the events at Summerhall? Certainly, if you've seen my previous video series on the tragedy at Summerhall, you'll know that the hopes of a dragon being born at Summerhall might not represent a literal dragon, but a metaphorical or symbolic one. Since we know that no actual dragon was born during the tragedy at Summerhall, some have hypothesized that the figurative dragon born during this event was Rhaegar Targaryen himself. Certainly this wouldn't be the only time that a Targaryen, either in person or in a prophecy, is referred to as a dragon. Ser Jorah himself tells Daenerys in Game of Thrones how her brother Rhaegar was, quote, the last dragon. That said, and through looking at things in a more hypothetical or supernatural framework, did Rhaegar's birth at Summerhall carry more mystical or magical elements? King Aegon V did attempt to revive literal dragons at Summerhall, but did his attempted or potentially failed ritual result in the birth of a Targaryen boy with powers that most other members of the family didn't possess? Though I'm leaning towards a more symbolic or metaphorical image of a dragon and Rhaegar being born at Summerhall, I think that in looking through a number of events in his life, one could potentially make the argument that Rhaegar was truly unlike his kin, in more than one supernatural way. Though he was, as mentioned, a sad youth, I do find his ability to alter his own path in life at least intriguing enough worth addressing. The fact that despite his bookish nature, he overtly chose to become a warrior because of something simply written in one of his scrolls is curious. Certainly it could, and very well may be of no real significance, but it does make one curious as to what Rhaegar read that was so important for him to go against what might have been his natural inclinations. Did the scroll represent something Rhaegar had foreseen or dreamed about? Perhaps Rhaegar had visions of White Walkers invading Westeros, and seeing a scroll detailing their legendary existence only confirmed his worst fears, and emphasized a need to prepare the Seven Kingdoms and himself in the face of their arrival. Or perhaps it was something or someone a little less metaphysical who informed Rhaegar of their arrival. This leads me to discuss some theories behind his visits to Summerhall. All we truly know of these visits was that it gave him the ability to create beautiful yet tragic songs, seemingly about his own family. Though there is nothing overtly striking about Rhaegar's talent, nor his typically melancholic personality growing up, there is one connection that has been drawn between Rhaegar's visits to the ruins and events in A Song of Ice and Fire. In Book 3, Barristan Selmy explained to Daenerys how Rhaegar would often go to Summerhall with his harp, play music, and indulge in his own sadness. Immediately one chapter later, from Arya's point of view, she and the Brotherhood Without Banners encounter the ghost of Highheart, who effectively speaks the following, quote, "You are cruel to come to my hill, cruel. I gorged on grief at Summerhall. I need none of yours. Be gone from here, dark heart. Be gone." While it is known that the ghost was present at the tragedy at Summerhall and was originally presumed to have died there, her apparent survival has led many to speculate whether the ghost had also been in contact with Rhaegar. Some have supposed that perhaps during one of his visits to the ruins and site of his birth, he encountered the ghost of Highheart, who had lost her friend Jenny of Oldstones during the tragedy, and would return to mourn her own losses. In the same Arya chapter of A Storm of Swords, the member of the Brotherhood Without Banners, Tom Sevenstreams, would play the tragic Jenny song on his harp for the ghost in payment for her prophecies to the group. Certainly Tom playing the harp for the ghost can't be any coincidence, and if Rhaegar played his own harp for the ghost as well, the strange woman might have recounted tales of the prince's dead family members, and maybe even provided him with her own prophecies about his future or destiny. As such, it might not be any coincidence that Rhaegar would emerge from Summerhall in a state of sadness, and with new, beautifully tragic melodies composed on his harp. In the chapter previous to Arya's, Barristan did, after all, say the following, quote, "He likes to sleep in the ruined hall, beneath the moon and stars, and whenever he came back he would sing a song. When you heard him play his high harp with the silver strings, and sing of twilights and tears and the death of kings, you could not but feel that he was singing of himself and those he loved." While music on a harp is indeed fanciful, I should return to my earlier discussion of Rhaegar's desire to become a warrior. Was it perhaps linked to the ghost herself? In the TV series Game of Thrones, it is no secret that Children of the Forest were responsible for creating the White Walkers. Given the strong suspicion that the ghost of Highheart was herself one of the children, is it possible that she had some awareness of their looming invasion of Westeros? Again, I am entering some territory from my Tragedy at Summerhall video series, but going with that assumption, it would perhaps make sense for her to warn Rhaegar of this threat beyond the wall, just as she might have warned the previous generation of Targaryens who perished at Summerhall years earlier. Now, this train of thought would potentially lead one to believe that Rhaegar didn't necessarily possess any prophetic or innately mystical abilities, but I think the question still merits some inquiry, especially when looking at his desire for 3 children, that the dragon must have 3 heads, based on Daenerys' vision and Rhaegar's other potentially off-color behavior. Again, one might ask whether this need was linked to a potential connection between Rhaegar and the Ghost of Highheart, a hypothetical ability of his own to see visions of the future, or merely a statement articulated exclusively in one of Daenerys' visions. Certainly the declaration is partially one of the motivating lines which has led many to ponder who the so-called 3 heads of the dragons or characters are in the story, with most fingers pointed towards Jon and Dany, and a third seemingly leaning towards Tyrion's direction. Of course, that inquiry is best left for a separate video, but the question remains as to the nature of this possible statement by Rhaegar, and unfortunately it seems to leave us with more questions than answers in this case. Now, the statement does potentially explain Rhaegar's later attempts to seek out a suitable carrier for his third child, but as mentioned earlier, this path will be explored in part 2 of this series. For now, a final element that should be looked before I give my own personal opinion on Rhaegar was his tumultuous relationship with his father, King Aerys. Certainly their dynamic doesn't carry many theories in of itself, but it is interesting to note how their animosity shaped different factions at court. This issue is often overshadowed due to Rhaegar's subsequent escapades with Lyanna Stark, but it does make one wonder how, without the occurrence of Robert's rebellion, whether or not Rhaegar would have eventually sought the deposition of his own father, and whether Aerys' madness was a result of darker or more sinister forces involving themselves in the matters of mankind. One less supernatural occurrence that played a role in the division between Rhaegar and Aerys was an event known as the Defiance of Dusk. In short, the lord of the town, Dennis Darkland, desired to win a charter for his land which would give him more autonomy over his domain from the crown. However, his proposal was refused by the then hand of the king, Tywin Lannister, and so the lord withheld his payments to the crown. After Aerys himself traveled to Duskendale to hear Lord Darkland's petitions for the charter, the king was imprisoned in the town's dungeons for 6 months, evidently aggravating his mental state. Though this defiance was ended in part thanks to Barristan Selmy, this Knight of the Kingsguard did second-guess his rescue mission, wondering if he hadn't been better off letting Aerys rot at Duskendale and allow for their accession of Rhaegar Targaryen to the Iron Throne. This brings me to a rather crackpot theory, but hear it out. Is it possible that Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, knowing of his father's instability, played a role in his capture? Certainly the maddened King Aerys thought there was some truth to this conviction, that his son and heir had conspired with the Hand, Tywin Lannister, to have him killed during the Defiance, which would have allowed the prince to ascend the throne. One can easily dismiss this claim by Aerys as a product of his own madness, but even if it is unlikely, the possibility of Rhaegar's involvement in the Defiance does present a potentially darker side to the prince, though I am still far from convinced of this theory. Admittedly, when I discuss events surrounding Rhaegar's early life, it is difficult to go into too much depth without treading on all matters pertaining to the tourney of Harrenhal and Robert's subsequent rebellion. That said, there are some things I can give my 2 cents towards. For one thing, I do have some doubt as to whether Rhaegar truly had any overt prophetic abilities. In A Feast for Crows, Maester Aemon reveals that Rhaegar at first believed he was the prince that was promised, seemingly due to the burning of Summerhall. However, it would then appear he believed that his son, Aegon, was in fact the prince that was promised. On top of this, it would also seem that his prophecy eventually included the importance of 3 individuals rather than 1. Granted, it would appear that the 3 heads of the dragon are not in equivalence to the prince that was promised. Going back to my original point, one thing I do think that is undisputable is Rhaegar's firm belief in prophecies, even if he himself wasn't capable of fabricating them potentially. That scroll Rhaegar found in his youth, which motivated his transition into a warrior, is, I strongly suspect, a retelling of the prince that was promised prophecy, and given Rhaegar's bookish nature, it is perhaps understandable to see why he would be swayed to some degree by this foresight. That said, I don't think a scroll alone would be able to motivate Rhaegar's behavior on his own. I think there is indeed an indication that some form of knowledge, or at least something close to concrete proof of the White Walkers, for example, returning would have played a motivating factor for Rhaegar's behavior. Whether this was communicated to him by the Ghost of Highheart, or whether it is indeed through his own visions or even dreams of the future, are all things I could envision for Rhaegar. Certainly, I can't dispute prophecies and visions do have a way of tricking or misleading the opinions of certain characters who have them, Melisandre being a prime example, at least in the TV series. Anyway, folks, I think this is where I need your insight. Do you think Rhaegar truly had the ability to foresee some form of the future? Do you think Rhaegar also met and conversed with the Ghost of Highheart at Summerhall? Please let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. For the next video in the series, I will be addressing some facts and theories behind the tourney at Harrenhal, so if I left anything out in this video, or if there is something you would like me to address for that one, just let me know. Thanks again for watching, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoyed, and as always, I will see you all next time.